Hello. Hello, Shadow. Okay, so um, there are things that um, I would want to say before the whole Father Stephen comes on. Um, and frankly, I didn't want to spend Father Stephen's time on it, but I wanted it to be here as a reference for anybody who wants to understand what the discussion is about, what's going on. Hello, Ryan, and Happy New Year. Ryan is from the future. 5 hours in the future. Well, in 5 hours, it will be New Year's, secular New Year here. But it's already New Year's for Ryan because he lives in the future and he always has. Okay, so we were talking about what that discussion with Father Stephen is going to be about. So, to give perspective, and perspective may be the right word for this, Christians have been trying to understand the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Paul. Well, honestly, since the beginning of their religion, right? Because that is their religion. What happens is that how far back do we want to go? In the Reformation, there was an attempt by Protestants to get back to the teachings of the apostles. And really, I mean, I would say the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics both have this question of, okay, who is really teaching that which Jesus taught and that which ultimately Paul taught? Because frankly, all forms of Christianity that are really popular these days are Pauline Christians, because Paul wrote the majority of the Christian scriptures. Well, I mean, most of it is, and now you get into the question of which are actually the works of Paul, which are not, etc., etc., etc. So, this is a debate that was very live in the question of the Reformation. And here in the United States, where we live in a Protestant country mostly, the question of what exactly Paul and Jesus taught, and frankly, most people did not distinguish between what Paul and Jesus taught. What happened starting in the late 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, was there started to be a lot of re-evaluation about, specifically by looking at things like Josephus and Philo of Alexandria, but just generally scientifically trying to understand what the environment, the historical context of the teachings of Jesus and Paul were. Then the Holocaust happened, and that encouraged Christians to do even more soul searching. And then the state of Israel coming into being started both a great resurgence of Jewish publication of our teachings, because at least the Jews living in Israel no longer felt restrained, constrained, and fearful. And there became a great interest from especially Christians in truly understanding Hebrew and Judaism and the Hebrew Bible. And then all the archaeology came, and then, like it says, Luke, Happy New Year. This is an introduction to the discussion that will be had next Tuesday. By the way, if people want to jump on and say hi, they can, and we can have this discussion. But I want to get through the material so that it is here, so that no, Father Stephen is going. There is a scheduled live stream with Father Stephen next Tuesday, and there's we are going to be, this is pre-gaming, so I'm explaining the context for the discussion so that we don't have to have the context all over again. Okay. So you have the questions of and then you have the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which really most of them have not been. Hey Garth, glad you got it. Hope you liked it. It's one of my favorite things, and I figured you guys would enjoy it. It is. I mean, yeah, it's one of my favorite things. Okay, back to what we were talking about. So the especially the Dead Sea Scrolls have only really been published, and people have been. Oh wow, okay. I didn't mean to make it the gift exchange, but thank you. It's the especially the Dead Sea Scrolls have helped recontextualize. Oh, very nice. If I understand your meaning, Mazel tov. Anyway, back to Paul. So understanding what exactly were the teachings of Jesus. I mean, so James Tabor, who was a Protestant scholar of Christianity and a real devotee to Jesus, he ended up writing a book talking about how Paul's teaching really is different from Jesus' teaching. He describes it. He describes it as. Okay. He describes it as being able to see the teachings of Jesus behind the Gospels in a similar way as you can see pebbles under a stream shining, right? Well, yeah. I have personally a very different view. I think you can see Jesus actually knew Talmud Torah, and Paul didn't. And so there is a very, very stupid idea some people have that the Talmud is a book from 600 AD. The Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, which is what most people mean when they say Talmud, is a record of discussions which was finally put in its final form around the year 600. it is a discussion. That same discussion is also evidenced in the the Jerusalem Talmud, which is at least 100 years earlier, probably 200 years earlier, I think. And both of them are a discussion of the Mishnah, which is a mnemonic poem which was redacted by Rabbi Judah the Prince around the year 200. And Rabbi Judah the Prince, here, let's pull this up. So Rabbi Judah the Prince was the son of Simeon ben Gamliel II, right? That's Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Who was the son of Gamliel II, who was the son of Shimon ben Gamliel I, who was the son of, you guessed it, Gamliel. Oh, really? Hold on. Oh, okay. So this is Shimon ben Gamliel I, but he's the son of Gamliel II, who was the son of Shimon ben Gamliel I, and that he is the son of oh, no, hold on. Okay. I'm getting myself confused. Yes. So you have Shimon, you have Gamliel II, who's the son of a Shimon, whose father was Gamliel. Why is this not giving me? And that Gamliel I, right, is he was the son of Shimon ben Gamliel, right? And Shimon ben Gamliel was the son of actual Gamliel the Elder, which for some reason there is no link to Gamliel I. Why is there no link to Gamliel I? I don't know why there's no link to Gamliel I here. There should be a link to Gamliel I here. There you go, which is Gamliel I. Now, Gamliel I is the person who's being referred to in Acts 5 and is a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church. I believe he may also be a saint in the Catholic Church. I'm not sure. Is he? And Gamliel I is a grandson of Hillel. Was he a grandson? Yeah, he's the son of Shimon ben Hillel. So he's the son of Shimon ben Hillel, and then Hillel being Hillel, right? Hillel the Elder, the great Hillel, founder of the house of Hillel. So you have Hillel, Shimon, Gamliel I, the one in Acts 5, Shimon, his son, then Gamliel II, right? Then Shimon, his son, and then you have Rabbi Judah the Prince, who is the redactor of the Mishnah, okay? And both Talmuds are discussions of the Mishnah. And these teachings, right? So, I mean, at least here, I think by the secular understanding, you have, yes. Here, maybe I should write it out even more clearly. I don't know why there isn't like a handy dandy chart, but Hillel, Shimon, Gamliel, Shimon, Gamliel II, Shimon, Judah the Prince. Got it? And no, this was not announced, Sandy. I just decided to do it. Okay, so the tradition of Talmudic debate is much older than the Talmuds, right? And what specifically 4QMMT, and you can look up 4QMMT. There's a lot of information on it. It is hey Grizz, Happy New Year. Almost. Is it New Year yet? It's not New Year yet. Are you doing a virtually not alone tonight? Okay, back to what we were talking about. I would do a virtually not alone, but my friends from high school and I, we've been doing an online thing for several years, and I'm probably going to go there. But I might wait. I mean, theirs starts at 9:30 our time, which is in 2 hours. I might wait around a little if people are around. Okay, back to Paul and 4QMMT. So 4QMMT, which is a letter from a leader of the Essenes to the leader of the Sadducees, really shows that the halachic method, that this Talmudic method, was certainly around a lot. But you also see it in the Gospels. And as believing Christians, right, because there's a lot of, so secular scholars believe that a lot of the Talmudic argumentation, etc., is anachronistic in the Gospels as well. Okay, so it has become, with all of the new evidence over past hundreds of years, all of the discussions between various types of Christians has led to people trying to better understand what Jesus was saying in the context of the time he was saying it in, and what Paul was saying, and how those two interact. Now, I made this handy dandy list of Paul of Tarsus possibilities with the various people who they could be ascribed to, right? So from 1 being the most malignant to 7 being the still malignant. I mean, most Christians would not. Marcionism is a heresy in Christianity. So Robert Eisenman has this idea that Paul was actually a Roman spy whose job it was to kind of get the messianic Jewish, yes, very nice. Thank you, Andrew. Hillel the Elder, Shimon ben Hillel, Gamliel, Shimon ben Gamliel, Gamliel the second of Yavne, Shimon ben Gamliel the second, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. Yes. Okay. So Eisenman has this idea, and this has been taken up by some people on the internet as also representing actually what Jesus was doing, which is a Roman invention of Christianity in order to subdue first the Jews, but that's what Eisenman understands it. But like on the internet, people have this idea that it's to subdue paganism in total. Anyway, so the idea is that Paul was Grizz says, let's have the AI make a play with all of these versions of Paul having a picnic. You can do that. That's up to you. Okay. So that's Eisenman's idea, is Paul of Tarsus, Roman provocateur. Jesus was a Jewish leader. And Paul comes along, basically destroys the Jewish rebellion that was led by Jesus. That's how Eisenman understands it. Maccoby, Hyam Maccoby, in his book, here we can take a look at his book, The Mythmaker. It is available for free on archive.com. .org, sorry, not .com. And specifically in chapter 7, he talks about actually this Romans 7 that we're going to be discussing. But Hyam Maccoby has this idea of Paul possibly or even likely not having even been Jewish at all, kind of being a pretender, kind of being this person who comes and takes over either somebody else's ID or creates an identification for himself, and becomes somebody, but he's clearly a liar. Yosef, that's how you spell Yosef's last name, Raisin. Yosef had a little bit of he has a little bit of an understanding between Hyam Maccoby and James Tabor. So Tabor believes that Paul was a student of Gamliel, but he believes that Paul kind of went off in a different direction, whereas we don't really see Jesus doing that. And so Tabor understands Paul teaching something different than Jesus, but having been trained as a rabbi. Father Stephen understands Paul as someone who was trained under Gamliel, went off the teachings of Gamliel, misunderstood them, and then came back to them and believes that Paul is actually consonant with, and what he's repentant of is when he persecuted the church, but that was a church which was in sync with the teachings of, I guess, Gamliel as well. And I mean, if you read his book, basically everybody was a student of Gamliel. Stephen was a student of Gamliel. So like he has a whole, but he sees Jesus not as teaching something against what we would say is true Judaism. Then you have Martin Luther, and Martin Luther's understanding of Paul is Paul, in line with the teachings of Jesus, taught something completely different from Judaism, right? And it's certainly not a teaching which is in keeping with all of the things that we know were true before Jesus was born. So the real question becomes, okay, do you believe that Talmudic Judaism is a representation, or somehow even, I mean, the rabid crazies will say, oh, it has nothing to do with what existed before Jesus. Like, that's not Judaism. It's like, okay, so let's call Judaism that which was the synagogues, right? The synagogues that Paul and Jesus went to, right? There were people there practicing this religion called Judaism, right? And what was going on there? What was the continuation of that, right? Well, Luther kind of believes that Jesus came to upend what that was, whereas Father Stephen is like, no, he came to fulfill it. And then there's Marcionism, which takes Luther and dials him up even a bit more, and basically says Jesus came to save us from the God of the Jews. And that really, I mean, once you get up to 7 on here, you're really talking about going into like crazy town. But a positive Christianity and what basically the Third Reich church taught was really very Marcionite, and there's a resurgence of it more recently. Okay, I hope that was useful. Peter could bring the charcuterie. Very funny. Okay, now to explain Maccabee's position a little bit more. Probably somebody's asking if I'm going to do a Lonely Jew on New Year's stream. Probably not. Although this could kind of count. Okay, and then so let's read some of chapter 7 of where Maccabee is kind of showing, and he goes through talking about how Paul is his understanding of what being in Christ is not Jewish, and how Paul misunderstands the Kal V'chomer, which is another discussion. But he finally gets to this where he's talking about what we're going to be talking about, right? So here, some passages of Paul's epistles have been thought to be typically the Pharisaic simply because their argument has a legalistic air. When these passages are critically examined, however, the superficiality of the legal coloring soon appears, and it is apparent that the use of illustrations from law is merely a vague rhetorical device without any real legal precision, such as is found in the Pharisaic writings, even when the legal style is used for homiletic biblical exegesis. An example from Romans is the following, and then he goes ahead and quotes Romans 7, 1-6, which is what we're going to be discussing. The above passage is remarkably muddle-headed. Paul is trying to compare the abrogation of the Torah and the advent of the new covenant of Christianity with a second marriage contracted by a widow. But he is unable to keep clear in his mind who it is that corresponds to the wife and who to the husband, or even who is supposed to have died, the husband or the wife. It seems that the correspondence intended is the following, and this really is kind of Luther's understanding of this. And Father Stephen would say they're both misunderstanding what Paul was trying to say. Where were we? The wife is the church, the former husband is the Torah, and the new husband is Christ. I think this is how most Protestants really do understand, and frankly, I would say most Christians understand Romans 7, but it just it fails to work in so many ways. But yeah, Paul tells us that a wife is released by the death of her husband to marry a new husband. This should read, therefore, in the comparison, that the church was freed by the death of the Torah to marry Christ. Instead, it is the wife church that dies, right? And frankly, Father Stephen would say that this is deliberate because he reads Paul as not saying chas v'shalom that the Torah would die, because that would obviously be the opposite of everything that the Torah taught, and would turn Paul and, well, if you believe that he was teaching Jesus, Paul and Jesus into heretics, which, yeah, I think Paul was teaching that, but I also think Paul was as muddle-headed as everybody else says. Okay. Instead, it is the wife church that dies. You, my friends, have died to the law by becoming identified with the body of Christ. And there's even some play with the idea that the new husband, Christ, has died. The only term in the comparison that is not mentioned as having died is the Torah. Yet this is the only thing that would make the comparison valid. On the other hand, there is also present in the passage an entirely different idea, that a person becomes free of legal obligations after his or her own death. This indeed seems to be the theme first announced, that a person is subject to the law so long as he is alive and no longer. The theme of the widow being free to marry after the death of her first husband is quite incompatible with this. Yet Paul confuses the two themes throughout, so much so that at one point he even seems to be talking about a widow and a husband who are free to marry each other and have acceptable children because both widow and new husband are dead. Confusion cannot be worse confounded than this. Thus, what we have here is a case of someone trying to construct a legal analogy and failing miserably because of his inability to think in the logical manner one expects of a legal expert. The passage thus does not prove that Paul had Pharisee training, just the contrary. What we can say, however, is that Paul is here trying to sound like a trained Pharisee. He announces in a somewhat portentous way that what he is going to say will be understood only by those who have some knowledge of the law, and he is clearly intending to display legal expertise. It is only natural that Paul, having claimed so often to have been trained as a Pharisee, should occasionally attempt to play the part, especially when speaking or writing for people who would not be able to detect any shortcoming in his performance. In the event, he has produced a ludicrous travesty of Pharisee thinking. In the whole of Pharisee literature, there's nothing to parallel such an exhibition of lame reasoning. I mean, I basically agree with him. I love this laying out of the possibilities format and you going through it like a detective. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what the story is, but okay. And then I also wanted to read the part where he talks about I mean, you guys can read this stuff for yourself if you want to, but the question arises whether Paul even had a sufficient grasp of the Hebrew language to have engaged in studies at a Pharisee academy. So Acts says that he spoke Aramaic, which like people did, but he doesn't actually show that he knows the Hebrew Bible. The study of the Bible in the original Hebrew was the basis for all Pharisee studies. Knowledge of the Hebrew of the Bible was relatively rare in Paul's time, as is shown by the existence of the Targum, the translation of the Bible into Aramaic that was made for the benefit of the ordinary Jews who could not understand the Bible in Hebrew. The indications from Paul's writings are that he knew very little Hebrew. His quotations from the Bible, which number about 160, are from the Greek translation, the Septuagint, not the original Hebrew. And then there's his famous blunder in Galatians 3, I think it is. Am I thinking of the right thing? Where he says, it is seed in the singular, not in the plural. And it's like, oh my God. Anyway, so the question becomes, from reading the evidence of Romans 7, where do you fall on this 1 through 7 scale of who Paul was, right? And so number 3, Yosef just believes that he was basically a Hellenized normal Jew, and he was passing himself off as a student of Gamliel, but Yosef doesn't believe that he could possibly have been a student of Gamliel. I don't believe he could have possibly been a student of Gamliel. Tabor believes that maybe he was a student of Gamliel, but maybe not a good one, I guess. Yeah, and Father Stephen believes that he was a student of Gamliel, but that he was teaching in line with Gamliel. Yeah, I think I went through all the stuff that I meant to go through. Okay. Now the question becomes, does anybody want to come on and discuss and clarify this or not? I guess I could do a Lonely Jew on New Year's stream until my friend's thing later. Run! Our sages tell us he was on a mission to separate the Erev Rav vows. Well, that actually is. I looked that up. Shimon Kephas may have been Peter, but I don't think it makes sense. Happy New Year, Ron. Happy New Year, everybody. If people want to jump on to talk about this, I guess I could keep this stream going. If people like, Grizz was on recently. Grizz, are you doing a virtually not alone tonight? Because there are plenty of people who are virtually alone. Rav Moshe David Vaye. I don't know who Rabbi Moshe David Vaye is. Moshe David Vaye. Kabbalist from Italy. Commentary on the Torah, but it doesn't say what. Sefer Likutim, Chazonot, commentary on Ovadia. Jewish Encyclopedia. What does it say? Mevakshe Hashem. I do not know that. He apparently his lectures were attended by the Ramchal. I Sette Giorno della Verità. Apparently, a 7-part polemic work in Italian against Christianity. He also wrote in Hebrew 70 Tikkunim on Deuteronomy 36:12. Kerem Hamed. Yeah, I've never heard of him before. Actually, you may have mentioned him before. Chazi may have mentioned him. Don asks, what is Erev Rav? Good question. Don, do we want to talk about that here? Good night, Sandy. Happy New Year. Do we want to talk about the Erev Rav here? The Erev Rav is the mixed multitude. It is mentioned when Moses takes the Jews out of Egypt and a mixed multitude comes with him, which God calls Moses's people. And the role and status of this mixed multitude is contentious, to say the least, in Judaism. Okay. If nobody's going to join, I will end this stream, and maybe I will, in the future, if people interested in I could do a Lonely Jew on whatchamacallit stream if people are interested on New Year's. Here, we'll give people some Father Stephen to chew on. I'm going to use host's prerogative to put the Reverend Parcells to bed because he does need to get up in the morning.
Sorry, Reverend. Thank you.
But before he goes, I have a question. Let's say, God forbid, that I were to burn somebody at the stake for not being a Trinitarian. And I did not repent of that. Is that a salvation issue?
Sometimes Jacob takes that devil's advocate thing too far.
There a proverb that says something like, don't answer a fool according to his folly.
But there's a proverb that says, answer a fool according to his folly.
There is. Exactly right. I'm going to leave it to you guys to determine, which of those was applicable in this situation as I go. So, but anyhow, good.
Thank you, Reverend.
Good to
Thank
chat
you.
with you all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yeah. The